One of the weirdest things that has ever happened in One Piece is Shanks' arrival to Marineford. Right at the start of the arc, it was revealed that Shanks had clashed with Kaido in the New World, trying to stop the latter from going to Marineford. Yet somehow, Shanks did not only manage to stop Kaido, but he himself managed to go to Marineford in time for the war. This is something fans have asked directly from Oda about, to which he's conveniently refused to give an answer. Now that we're in the final saga, we may have finally gotten the answer as to how Shanks got to Marineford so fast, and it connects to his celestial dragon heritage, the Five Elders, and Imu himself. In October of this year, Oda did a special Q&A where he answered 10 fan questions, and one of them was about how Saint Vigarland Garling in the past was able to fight the strongest pirates in the world on God Valley. Oda's answer was simply that Garling is strong, and that there's a reason for his strength. While it may sound like Oda dodged the question here, he may have actually given a huge hint to the celestial dragons and Shanks' powers with this answer. Keep this bit about Garling's strength in mind, because I promise it'll be really important later in the video. But for now, let's return to Shanks. Him during the Summit War going all the way from the New World to Marineford in such a short time is genuinely bizarre. Sea travel in One Piece is something that can take from days up to weeks, even with the fastest ships. Even with a ship as fast as the Thousand Sunny, it took the Straw Hats half a day just to escape from Totland, which is just one country in the New World. Even if Shanks and Kaido's clash happened at the very start of the New World, it should have still taken Shanks at least a few days to sail from there to Marineford. Yet Shanks managed to make this trip within a day of him clashing with Kaido. This is something the characters in Marineford make note of, where they're genuinely confused as to how Shanks could have gotten to the scene so fast. Based on every other instance of sea travel we've seen in the story, no one has ever come even close to sailing this kind of distance this quickly. Even Goldie Roger himself took an entire year to reach the different islands in the Grand Line to gather the road poneglyphs before going to Laugh Tale. Therefore, it is not at all unreasonable to assume that instead of sailing, Shanks used some ability or trick to travel this distance. As it also happens, in the final saga, we've seen just the ability that could do something like this. During the Egghead arc, Saint J. Garcia Saturn is seen being able to perform a summoning technique that transports the rest of the Gorosei all the way from Marie Choice to Egghead Island in an instant. Egghead Island itself is seemingly deep in the New World, and it even took someone as fast as Kuma an entire day to fly there from the Holy Land. The Gorosei, however, managed to do this same trip within a fraction of the time. It is actually possible that Shanks is able to perform the same special abilities that the Five Elders can. The linchpin of this theory comes from one man, Saint Vigarland Garling, the newly appointed member of the Five Elders. This is where we return to Oda's earlier answer in the Q&A, where he said, "There is a reason for Garling's strength. The rest of the Elders have demonstrated a variety of supernatural abilities, like telepathy, telekinesis, extended lifespans, and invulnerability. These are also abilities seemingly granted by Imu, as we saw him being able to remotely talk to and de-age Saint Saturn at the end of the Egghead arc. It is however also possible that Imu has granted these powers to celestial dragons other than the Five Elders, and that this is what Oda was hinting at with his answer to the question about Garling's strength. The God Valley incident happened decades before Garling became an Elder, but it's possible that the reason why Garling was able to fight some of the strongest characters in the story back then is because he already at this point possessed some of the Gorosei's special abilities. To go a step further, it could be that this does not only apply to Garling, but the other members of the Vigarland family as well. The reason why this idea is so intriguing is because Shanks is extremely likely to be a member of the Vigarland family. During One Piece Film Red, when the Gorosei receive news that Shanks' supposed daughter is causing problems, they bring up the idea that she could be a member of the Vigarland family. This heavily implies that the Gorosei themselves believe that Shanks is a member of the Vigarland family of celestial dragons. While One Piece movies are generally not canon, Eiichiro Oda has a history of revealing canon material in said movies. For example, in a recent SBS, Oda has revealed that Shiki's devil fruit, the Fua Fua no Mi, is actually canon, even though it has only ever been shown in One Piece film's Strong World. The idea of Shanks being a member of the Vigarland family is also something that seems to very much fit in the story. From what we know, Shanks was found as a baby after the God Valley incident by the Roger pirates 38 years ago. The God Valley incident was an event that involved several celestial dragons, including Saint Vigarland Garling. Garling in his youth also bears a striking resemblance to Shanks. While it's unclear whether Garling is actually Shanks' father, all the evidence points to the two of them at the very least being related. However, even if this is all true, what are the hints that Vigarland family members like Garling and Shanks actually have the same powers as the elders? There's actually a lot of evidence of this in the manga, even beyond Oda's cryptic answer to the Q&A. When Garling gets appointed to be Saturn's successor, he receives orders that the Gorosei had not heard about. As the only authority in the world government higher than the Gorosei is that of Imu, this heavily implies that the orders came from him. The important thing here, however, is how readily Garling accepted these orders. This very strongly hints that Garling likely knew of Imu's existence, even before the Egghead arc. If this is indeed true, it's also possible that Imu has already given Garling some of the powers used by the Gorosei, even before his new appointment. Essentially, Imu may have been preparing Garling to be a future elder for years before the present story. During the God Valley incident, Garling was confident enough that he thought he could fight against the Roger pirates and the Rocks pirates, which are two of the most powerful pirate crews we know of in the entire story. What is also extremely noteworthy is that Garling declares his intent to deal with these pirates, even before the arrival of Garp and the marine reinforcements. The reason for Garling's confidence could be that he might have already possessed the regenerative ability of the Gorosei during God Valley. In the Egghead arc, we see that the five elders are able to regenerate from virtually all damage, even if the one attacking them is an Emperor of the Sea. If Garling also had this ability, it would make sense for him not to fear facing even the strongest pirates in the world. We've seen that the Gorosei themselves have this overconfidence, where Saturn did not even bother to dodge an attack from Bonnie, because he knew that he would regenerate. The elders also showed no fear in having to fight Luffy in Gear 5th, whereas Kaido, Lucci and Kizaru all showed at least some fright in facing Nika's powers. One thing that should be mentioned, however, is that even though Garling might have had some of the Gorosei's abilities on God Valley, this does not mean that he had all their powers. For one, Garling clearly did not possess the longevity of the elders. We for example see that Saint Saturn looked exactly the same 200 years ago, as he did in the current story. Meanwhile, Garling has visibly aged a lot in the past 38 years after God Valley. If Imu does actually grant special powers to some of the celestial dragons, it could be that he reserves some abilities like longevity just to those with the rank of elder. The world government actually has a history of working like this, where people get rewarded for their efforts with special powers. After they'd successfully delivered Robin and Frankie to him, Spandam rewarded both Kaku and Khalifa with devil fruits. Fujitora's dialogue also heavily hints at him having only received his devil fruit after becoming an admiral during the time skip. It could be the same with Garling, where Imu might have seen potential in him and given him power in the past. And now that he's one of the elders, Imu will grant him the rest of the abilities used by the Gorosei. This is where we finally return to talking about Shanks. Let's assume that this theory is right, and that Imu grants special abilities to celestial dragons like Garling. In other words, Imu would be grooming special celestial dragons to serve as future members of the Gorosei. What if Shanks had also been one of these celestial dragons chosen by Imu? A few things in the story could indicate that this could actually be true. If Garling was one of these celestial dragons Imu had granted power to, It would be natural to think that Imu would have done the same to Shanks, if he is indeed Carling's son or a close relative of his. As the possible child of the commander of the Holy Knights, Shanks might have been born with a lot of talent. Shanks' talent is actually noted in the story, where Bucky says that Shanks as a kid was brimming with so much talent that it made Bucky give up on his own dreams. It could also make sense why Imu would have already started preparing Shanks to be one of his top followers, already when he was just a baby. We've seen many times in the story that characters who learn to use their abilities when they're already kids usually become very powerful with them later on as adults. There would also be a psychological opportunity for Imu to groom some of the celestial dragons to be his minions from an early age. If a child is brainwashed to think of Imu as their king and master since they were born, they could become completely devoted to him. This could actually explain a lot about the elders and why they are so loyal to Imu. All of them could have just been kids handpicked by Imu to serve him as the king of the world. It would also explain why Imu, who is willing to destroy entire nations to keep himself hidden from the world, would be willing to trust someone like the Five Elders. This is especially because most of the celestial dragons do not seemingly even know that Imu exists. Spoiler alert, but something similar to this was actually done in the Fullmetal Alchemist manga. The series is set in a country ruled by an evil being, known as Father. This is however all a secret, and everyone thinks the leader of the military is the actual head of the country. In reality though, they are simply a hand-picked puppet of Father, given special powers, and groomed from birth to rule the country in his stead. It is a bit grim to think that this could be the backstory of the Five Elders, and a possible path that Shanks could have gone down. If Imu intended for Shanks to be a future member of the Gorosei, however, these plans were cut short by Roger taking Shanks when he was just a 1-year-old at God Valley. Because of childhood amnesia, it is likely that Shanks does not remember his time with the Celestial Dragons before he was found by Roger. Still, as brought up before, it's possible that Shanks was already given some of the Elders' powers before he left. This would be pretty big for the story. Shanks having the same abilities as the Elders would actually explain a lot of things about his character. For one, it would finally answer how the Red Hair Pirates were able to travel from the New World to Marineford in such a short span of time. If Shanks had the same summoning technique that Saint Saturn used, he could have very quickly moved his ship and crew from the New World to Paradise in time to get to Marineford. It could also explain what may have happened between Shanks and Kaido. Shanks clearly did not beat Kaido in a fight, as Kaido during the Wano arc still believes that no one in the world can beat him. When fighting Luffy, Kaido also says that it has been forever since he's been in a serious fight. It could be that Shanks and Kaido clashed, but Shanks quickly teleported away from the battle, after making sure that Kaido could not make it to Marineford in time. Shanks is certainly no stranger to fighting dirty, and could have simply used something like sabotage to stop Kaido before leaving. Shanks possessing Saturn's summoning ability could also explain some of the other times in the story, where he has seemingly been able to travel from one place in the world to the next very quickly. This could even go back to chapter 1, where Shanks without any ship or boat was able to go to the sea to rescue Luffy, right before he was attacked by the Lord of the Coast. And yes, I do understand that this would be yet another hidden power already present in chapter 1, just like Conqueror's Haki or the Nika fruit. Another thing to consider is that Shanks is someone who himself says that he's been all over the world, which is evidenced by the crewmates he recruited after Roger's execution, being from all of the different blues. This may be an overlooked part of the story, but Shanks traveling from one blue to the next would have been something very challenging. Because Reverse Mountain is just one way, the only way to truly travel between the different seas of the One Piece world is by crossing the Calm Belt, which is infested with Sea Kings. Even more noteworthy is that Shanks somehow managed to do this when he was still a rookie, as his crew was already assembled when he met Luffy in the East Blue 12 years ago. If Shanks was able to use the Elder's magic circle though, he might not have had to cross the Calm Belt at all. As a side note, Shanks' crewmates have some of the weirdest names in the entire story. He literally has guys like Lime Juice, Ponk Punch, and Building Snake on his ship. There's also this new member to the crew, who's called Like This Video. No idea where Shanks found this weirdo. One big reason why Shanks possessing the same special abilities as the 5 elders would be so interesting is because it could also connect to one really big moment in Shanks' past. His fight with Blackbeard. On Egghead, Saint Saturn demonstrated that he's able to kill people by simply staring at them. If Shanks also had this ability, it could be a hint as to why Blackbeard, of all areas, tried to target Shanks' eyes in their fight. This however also brings up a question. How was Blackbeard able to scar Shanks if he had the Elder's powers? The Gorosei have demonstrated a regenerative ability, where they are able to heal themselves even from attacks from Gear 5th Luffy. This also goes beyond Shanks' fight with Blackbeard, and also makes you question how the Lord of the Coast could have taken Shanks' arm in Chapter 1. And while we're at it, if Shanks' powers are connected to Imu, couldn't Imu simply telekinetically kill Shanks at any point in time, just like he did with Saturn? It's pretty clear that Imu would want to do this, as Shanks is an enemy of the government who even stole the Nika fruit from them in the past. I think these questions actually open a lot of interesting possibilities for the story. For one, it's possible that longevity and regeneration are abilities that Shanks simply does not have. Earlier in this video, we discussed the idea of Garling already having some of the Elder's abilities at God Valley, as possibly hinted at by Oda himself. However, we also brought up that Garling clearly did not have the Elder's longevity, as he seemingly continued aging at a normal rate after God Valley. It could be that this is an ability Imu only grants to those who reach the rank of Elder, which would explain why he wouldn't have the same kill switch on Shanks that he did on Saturn. And yes, Shanks also not having the regeneration ability would explain why Blackbeard and the Lord of the Coast were able to scar him. However, let's assume that Shanks is actually able to regenerate. With regards to the Lord of the Coast, we already know that Shanks willingly gave his arm to the Sea King. What Shanks says to Whitebeard is that him losing his arm was his bet on the next generation, in other words, to Luffy. Even if Shanks had the ability to regenerate his arm, he could have in that moment simply chosen not to do it. We've seen with the Gorosei that they can control when and when not to use their abilities, as Saturn for example allowed Bonnie to stab him, just to taunt how powerless she was. What's far more interesting, however, is the scar Shanks received from Blackbeard. This is in particular because some of the Gorosei themselves have scars on their bodies. This would imply that, despite their apparent invulnerability, there is actually a way to permanently damage them. If Shanks also had this power, it could be that Blackbeard, somehow, is actually one of the few characters with the means to damage the Elders, and potentially even Imu himself. This could be connected to how inherently abnormal Teach is supposed to be, where he's able to eat multiple devil fruits just because of his body, or where the Gorosei themselves view his lineage as being special. It could also explain why Imu was seen tearing apart pictures of Blackbeard, along with pictures of Luffy and Shirahoshi, perhaps indicating that Teach genuinely is just as big of a threat as the user of the Nika fruit or a literal ancient weapon. It could also explain why even at this point in the story, Imu considered Blackbeard to be an even bigger potential threat than the likes of Kaido, Big Mom, Dragon, or even Shanks. Before moving on, I would also like to clarify one point, where Shanks tells Whitebeard that he's received countless scars, which seemingly goes against the idea of him being able to regenerate. In Japanese, the word for scar and wound is actually the same, kisu. For example, something like the wound Zoro got from Buggy, and the scar Kaido got from Oden, are both referred to as kisu. This means that the other wounds Shanks is referring to do not necessarily have to have left a scar, and could have been the same kind of wounds the Elders for example received on Egghead. To summarize the points brought up so far, This video argues that Imu potentially grants special powers not only to the 5 elders, but also to other chosen celestial dragons, like Garling, whom Imu wants to serve as elders in the future. Shanks could have been one of these special celestial dragons, and was granted some of the abilities used by the elders at birth. This could explain why Shanks was able to get to Marineford so fast, and why he's been able to travel the different seas of the world even as a rookie. If Shanks had the same power as Saturn, where he's able to kill people by just looking at them, it could also explain why Blackbeard, of all areas, attacked Shanks' eyes. There is however one last thing to discuss in this video, which is that Shanks having these kinds of special powers would explain why he's so abnormally strong. Shanks is clearly one of the strongest One Piece characters of all time, but what is truly incredible is that he's managed to achieve this power while being a normal human, having only one arm, and seemingly having not eaten a devil fruit. Yet, Shanks is still comparable or possibly even stronger than freaks of nature, like Big Mom and Kaido. This is a level of power only a few characters have ever reached in the One Piece story. In fact, among all the known top fighters in the story, the only ones who've seemingly reached the pinnacle without devil fruits are Roger, Garp, and potentially Mihawk. What is however very noteworthy about Shanks, which sets him apart from every other character in the story, is that he was able to do this even after getting maimed. In chapter 1, Shanks did not lose just his arm, but more than likely his dominant arm, as in every scene we see of him in the past, Shanks is wielding his sword with his left arm. Mihawk also views Shanks' lost arm as a big enough factor that he is no longer interested in dueling him. In One Piece, losing the limb you rely on in combat massively decreases your ability to fight. This is seen very prominently with someone like Zeph, who was a pirate strong enough to make it to the New World. After losing his right leg, however, Zeph thought that he would no longer be a pirate. In Shanks' case, however, he did not only continue being a pirate after losing his arm, but was still strong enough to become an emperor of the sea, which he managed to do only 6 years after his maiming. From what we've seen, Shanks also simply kept his left arm as a stump, and did not replace it with any artificial limb, like Kid or Aokichi. If Shanks managed to achieve this kind of strength without his dominant arm, or any devil fruit powers, he would pretty much have to be the most naturally talented human in the entire series, as even the likes of Roger and Garp still had all of their limbs. While this is not impossible, it would make Shanks one of the biggest outliers in the entire story. However, this could also alternatively be explained by something like the idea of this video, where Shanks' secret weapon would be him having the same special abilities as the 5 elders. Shanks could not only be a hockey master, he could also be a literal demon, where with these special abilities, he could do things like kill someone by just looking at them, or travel instantly from one corner of the world to the next. A part of me still likes the idea that Shanks is actually an extremely simple fighter, who only relies on physical strength and hockey, just like his captain. Still, a part of me also thinks that Shanks being a celestial dragon, and a member of the Vigarland family, has to serve some grand purpose, and that Shanks having the Elder's powers could potentially really elevate his character. If you'd like to see me make more theories like this in the future, the channel does have a membership program, which gives you things like loyalty patches and access to old videos. Consider checking it out if you want to support me. I'd really appreciate it. Thanks a lot for watching this video to the end.